Good morning. I am so glad to be here this morning and to see the beautiful sun and the beautiful weather. Technology is supposed to be helping us, isn't it? But sometimes it just brings stress and some suffering, and I hope my husband is going to be ready in the message. I always know that in June, I wait for Pastor Kirby to send me an email or text me and then say, Teresa, are you ready to come and share with us about Teresa's house? I stand here before you just humbly and say thank you for everything that you have been doing since 2012 supporting Teresa's house. I brought some beautiful pictures, the pictures of before and after when we first started the orphanage. Like my sister just introduced here, that I came from the Republic Democratic of Congo and moved to Rwanda and Burundi and experienced the genocide which killed millions of people. And during that time, I also lost 8 family members, brothers and sisters. It was so painful. There were times I didn't know that I was going to see tomorrow. But God's grace, I am standing here before you. In 2006, God puts the desire to go back to my country, the Republic Democratic of Congo, to go help the children who were left behind. The world left 4 million children orphans, living on the street with no one to care for them. Is that the first picture, huh? Yeah. The first picture of the child that you see is Alex. Today, Alex is our salesperson at the orphanage. But Alex came when he was only, I believe, 13. He was living with his mother, very ill mother, and his father died during the war. Alex didn't have any money. His mom didn't have any means to even support, even just the basic needs. And Alex followed us. I took 3 missionaries in the Congo, and then Alex said, if you can just help me, I know you help girls, but if you can help me, when I grow up, if I get my education, I will come back and help you, help these girls. So we decided to pay Alex tuition. He graduated from high school. This is Alex with Deb. And then went on in just 1 year for college and didn't finish, but then he came back and now is our salesperson. He goes and then sells the eggs that the orphanage, we have chicken coops, the orphanage, the kids produce the eggs, and Alex is the one who goes and gets the order and then comes and then gives the eggs. We also do vegetables. Another picture? And we have a second picture there. Is a picture of a little boutique with a girl named Karine. Karine is about the same story with Alex. If you look at Karine, she's sitting to my left hand. She was little in 2006. And this is in Simba. Today, this is Karine. During the war, her family was separated. Her father died, and then Karine couldn't find her mother when everybody was running away. So she ended up at the orphanage. And then 3 years later, we found the mother, and we reunited Karine with the mother. But before that, the mother was so poor that she couldn't even take care of her children. So we decided to give them a microloan. First of all, we started a program, parenting program, to teach one parent, because we had the 4 children with only one parent, and the rest of them were orphans of both father and mother. So we taught the parents how to sell, how to save money, and we gave them a small micro loan. It was about $350. And then Karin's mother, Karin at the orphanage learned sewing, learned how to plant and how to sell, and then Karin started to help her mother to sell. And today, Karin is a teacher at the orphanage, volunteering, coming back and teaching our little young ones how to sew, clothes, and to do that. So 10 years after. That's the end of it? Okay. So I think there was one more picture of our little new boy. This is a new baby. Now the baby is smiling, but we have a picture of this baby that was just dropped at our front door about 3 weeks ago. Baby Daniel, he has a smile now. But the picture of before, I think my husband forgot to put it in. And you could see only the bones. The baby was sleeping under the tables in the market. Her mother, who was a mentally ill, abandoned this baby. And one day she wanted just to kill the baby. These are the testimonies that we received after we started to do our investigation. And we took the child. It was weighing maybe just 5 kilos. And then 3 weeks after, baby Daniel has a smile in his face. So we thank God for that. We thank God for your help. And as I was thinking about what to share, we are getting ready to go back to Africa, my husband and I. And as I was thinking about what to share over there, in spite of all the suffering, in spite of everything that is going on in Africa, all around the world, and in the United States as well. So I started to read in the book of Habakkuk. You know, depending on God isn't that hard when life is sailing along. But when life piles up to the point where you can't see where you're going, it can be difficult to hold on to hope. What does it take to trust God in the darkness? Many of us are confused, weary, tired, lost, and perhaps a little bit afraid. The concept of hope and believing that God is doing something even when nothing is happening can be difficult to grasp. I was reading the 3 verses of the Bible in the book of Habakkuk. The book is so tiny that sometimes it's so hard even to figure out, to find out where it is in the Bible. Habakkuk is a prophet who's confused. He has some questions. In the 2nd verses of the 1st chapter, he says, "How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not hear me? Violence, I cry, but you do not come to save." The prophet felt that God not only was moving slow, but that his movement was confusing, and Habakkuk could not make sense of it. Imagine what his congregation must have felt The prophet who believes in God thinks God is too slow. Imagine your pastor, Stephanie, telling you that God is moving too slow and that she was confused. But then God responded to his statement and says, in chapter 1, verse 5, look at the nation and be amazed. Watch and be astounded at what I will do. For I am doing something in your own day, something you wouldn't believe even if someone told you about it. The prophet was so confused, and he had two problems. The first problem was that God is appearing to move too slowly, and the second problem was the inability to understand what he is doing because it seems so contradictory. In this particular prophecy, God was going to raise up an evil people called the Babylonian to discipline his people. Habakkuk was so confused that he says in verse 13, God, your eyes are too pure to approve of evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. But will you, who cannot allow sin in any form, stand by while they swallow us up? Should you be silent while the wicked destroy people who are more righteous than they? In another word, God, this is not fair. I know I'm bad, but they are worse. And that's what it reminded me of our election. I heard people say, he's bad, she's worse. Or she's worse, he's bad. God, you are pure, but you are using them more than you're using me. So that is not really fair. You are taking too long, God. I can't figure out what you are doing. And the little that I do figure out, it's not fair. It is not easy to say these words because they sound not spiritual. It is not easy to say, God, I don't understand, or God, you're not really moving. We are used to say God is going to fix it. He is able, He is pure, He is mighty. It's a lot easy to say that because it is so spiritual. But when we are by ourselves and we start to think our real thoughts, we start to ask a question. And we are confused because what God is doing seems confusing. The prophet is not the only one who had struggled with the methodology of God. In fact, it says in the second verse of chapter 3, the last chapter of the book, Lord, I have heard the reports about thee and the fear that you are taking too long. And I'm confused. And it's not fair. And I am afraid. What a combination of negative. And he is a preacher. There is only 3 chapters in this book. And the chapter begins in the pit, but you read at the end, it ends in the pig. The book begins in despair. Physically, the prophet is a nervous wreck and mentally is confused and uncertain about the future. We all feel that way. I felt that way when almost all my family was gone. And I grew up in a family, my father as a pastor, and couldn't understand. At one point, I even believed, do you God even exist? But at the end of verse 16, the prophet says, my legs gave way beneath me, and then I shook in terror. I will wait quietly for the coming days when disaster will strike the people who invade us. In spite of the confusion, fear, and uncertainty, he says in closing, chapter 17, even though the fig tree have no blossoms, and there are no grapes on the vine, even though the olive crop fails, and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the field, and the cattle barn are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He will bring me safely over the mountain. He will bring me in a high peak. From the world standpoint or non-Christian standpoint, we always have three options that we take when we look at the negative situation. One is sometimes we resign. And we usually say, that's just how things are. That's just the way it's going to be. Another way we deal with life when the future is uncertain is detachment. We distract ourselves so we don't have to think about it. We watch TV, we take drugs, or we drink, but that is only a camouflage. And the problem with the camouflage is that it hides the things for just sometimes. But we know inside us that the things are still there. And the third way we deal with uncertainty or struggle is what we call bravado, or when we use the power of positive thinking. I can do it. I am a man. I can hold my chin up. My mother raised me strong. I can do this. But the only problem with this is that when things get bad enough, all the pep talk in the world will not help you. The pep talk is good, but it doesn't last. It's just like, I remember as I was reflecting on this, my son is right now in Denver. He plays traveling team, and one time we were, I believe, in Kansas or Dallas, and we were playing against a team, and then we are there in the morning. We had an early game, and the team we were playing against wasn't there. And then we look at the time. I said to my husband, what's going to happen? My husband said, well, we're going to just win. And then like 2 minutes after that, we see these big giants, mostly African Americans with dreadlocks, and they're just marching, and then some of them were listening to songs, and then they're just doing scary faces, and I look at our boys, and I'm like, oh God, they're gonna kill us. And they're talking, and they're just trying to scare our boys. But at the half time, when the game started, our team score was about 42-9. So the other team lost it. There was no more pep talk because they saw the reality. Our team was prepared and they were just talking, and then the next day I asked my son, were you scared when they were coming and then they were huge and talking? He's like, Mom, that was just a talk. When somebody talk loud, you know that there's nothing there. So we were not afraid. So that's the problem with sometimes when we feel it and then we talk, but then when the reality sets in, we're like, we still have a problem. So the question we are faced with today is, what do we do when God is taking too long? What do we do when uncertainty is in the front of us? What do we do when we are afraid? What do we do when we are feeling like we are falling apart? Is it to resign? Just say, oh, that's just the way things are. But that won't do it. Is it detachment, camouflage? That doesn't address everything. Is it bravado, just talking? And that only goes so long. Habakkuk says in verse 18, yes, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will exalt in the Lord, even though I have my questions, even though I have my confusion, even though I don't see solution in my sight, even though God does not make sense. Rather than pretend that nothing is wrong, I am going to exalt in the Lord. That is, I am going to trust in the reliability of God, even when I can't see Him or what He is doing. I am going to choose to believe in the reliability of God, even in the darkness time. That's learning to trust God in the dark when we have no support for our faith, other than who we know Him to be. We appeal to two things. The first is God's character, what He is like. And the second thing is His works, what He has already done for others, whether for you or for someone else in the past. Faith is only meaningful to the degree that its objects have meaning. People always say, I have a faith, or I will have a faith. That's not the question. The question is, faith in what? What is the object of the faith? To believe is meaningless term until you tell me what you believe. Believe only matters if the object has substance. We will respond to our circumstances because our circumstances affects us. As a believer, we have to make a choice, and the choice is whether we will choose to believe God. That is the question. Will I choose to believe God? We have to believe two things about God. We have to believe His character. That is what He told us He is like. We have to believe it in the dark. We can't see it, we don't feel it, but since he can't lie, I must trust him and I must trust it is true. We have to believe in this work, in his works, and that is the reason why we need to know the Bible, because we need to know what he did yesterday. Habakkuk in chapter 3, verses 3 through 15, he was rehearsing what God did yesterday. He talks about the Red Sea. He talks about David killing Goliath. He talks about all these historical things that God did yesterday. Why is it important to know about what God did in the past, in the life of our mothers, in the lives of our friends, in the lives of our neighbors? Why do we need the testimonies? Because he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. What he did, we can still do it because he does not change. And this is called the immutability of God. His method varied, but his abilities don't. You look at chapter 2, verses 20, it says, "But the Lord is in the holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." To understand this verse, you need to look at the verses before that talks about dumb idols that people look for when they're in trouble and they look for solution. Why do we need to know what we need, that we need to be silent? Because when we can't figure out, when we can't solve it, we don't need to try to stay awake all night to try to figure it out. God knows what to tell us, what he wants to tell us, or what he wants us to know. And if he is not confirmed to you and me anything more than what he has already informed you and me, just go to sleep. We need to stop complaining or cussing or beating up ourselves. We need to be silent and let the Lord do what he's going to do. Leave God alone, because he is not a dumb idol. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. In my confusion, I worship God. In my fear, I worship. In my despair, I worship. In my emptiness, I worship. And all I can say is, Lord, I can't do this. Lord, I can only adore you in your temple because I have no explanation for anything that is going on right now. The Lord is in his holy temple, and let all the earth be silent before him. And then so he calls for the act of faith. You remember the story of Peter. Peter says, Lord, let me walk on water. I want to walk on the water. And Jesus said, come on, Peter, walk on water. Peter stepped out of the boat. Very risky. There was a storm on the sea. He steps out and begins to walk on water. Peter is walking on top of a storm. But the Bible says he began to be distracted by the winds and the waves around him. In other words, he began to focus on the circumstances. He took his eyes off the Lord and began to focus on the situation. He says to himself, Peter, you must be fool that you're doing this, walking on the water. He started to talk to himself. He was doing fine as long as he was walking and talking to Jesus. But the moment that he started to look at how bad the situation is, the Bible says he began to sink. You and I will sink every time when we focus on our circumstances and do not focus on the solution. Then the Bible says, he looked up and says, Lord, save me. See, when he changed his focus back to what God started him in the first place, he began to walk on the water again. So today God is inviting us today to look up, to keep our eyes on him. You may not get rid of the storm, but you will be walking on it. It won't be walking on you. Thank you so much. May God be glorified.